Welcome to the Jewish Museum of Florida, FIU's participation in On the Avenue. My name is Jacqueline Goldstein, curator of the Jewish Museum of Florida. And I want to be talking now about our new exhibit, Will Eisner, comic illustrator and innovator, and take you through the tour. So let's get started. Will Eisner, born in New York in 1917, was the creator of the Spirit comic book series that you see a few pages here, which began in 1940 and lasted until 1952. And the Spirit was the story of Denny Colt, and he was in the police force, and then perished, woke up in the cemetery, and suddenly was the Spirit, who was a vigilante. And he worked with the detective of the chief of police, who was an old friend of his. And what interesting thing that Eisner said when he was creating the Spirit was that at the time Superman was coming out and all these other costumed heroes, and Eisner did not want that. He wanted his character to basically be a regular guy. And his one concession was, after he was told it needs to be some, kind of a costume, his one concession was to put on a domino mask, which is really just a mask, that's covering the eyes with eye holes, obviously, and, gloves and a fedora with his suit. And with that, he was able to create this vigilante character. And this right here that you see, unfortunately, I can't get you much closer, but this actually, the reason why I put this on exhibit, it was Eisner, one of his favorite stories that he ever did for the Spirit. And it's the story of Gerhard Schnabel. And Eisner really related to it because it was basically a down and out guy from, a lower income neighborhood. And he goes and tries to, make something of himself. And unfortunately, it doesn't end well for Gerhard Schnabel. But Gerhard Schnabel was able to fly, and early in his life, everybody told him, "Don't do it. People think you're, weird or whatever, somebody different." So he hides it, and then he gets fired from his job and goes up to the roof, and he sees the building being taken over by thieves, and so he decides he's going to try to jump and help thieves. And what happens is he ends up missing the building and goes down all the way to the street. Nobody ever knew he could fly. And it was a sad story, and that's the end of the story. But it was very emotional for Eisner. And Eisner grew up in my hometown of New York City. He grew up, many of his stories have been affected by his growing up. He grew up in tenements in New York City, the son of lower income parents. And this really had effect on his career and how he drew, illustrated, and wrote his stories. Let me take you through some other, as we see here. This is a closer look up at Gerhard Schnabel. This is called on-timesmanship. I'd like to get you closer. If you have a chance to come back into the exhibit, these white circles on the floor will take you where you need to go. And you can motor yourself around. And over here, you can press these whites to see my data points, which will give you much more in depth than what I'm racing through right now. So on-timesmanship is basically, it's from a chapter of one of his graphic novels. And by the way, he was the creator of the graphic novel. The first one in 1978 was called A Contract with God. So he had called graphic novels sequential art. And it was the first of its kind, basically a comic book, but, in a novel, style, obviously much longer than a regular comic book. So on-timesmanship fits right in with his growing up in the city. These are different scenes of commuting. As you can see here, people trying to get into an elevator, go around. Here's commuting through the train station, all the trials and tribulations that happen with commuting at the city. If you see here, there's another person, worker in the office, and of course, your New York City ever-present traffic. This group of images here, I put them on exhibit because they are significant in being a part of one of Eisner's larger groups of series of smaller, vignettes basically put into a larger book. And this one is about city people. And let me keep us going through. I put in some large blow ups. Color images in his comics. As you can see here, this is from The River of Crime. Here's our character of the spirit. And he is under these lights that Eisner liked to draw, really showed the drama, the heightened drama of the picture, the spirit walking alone by himself in the cover of night. And here you can see crime as in floating through the grate right there. And it's basically, one of the most intense images from the spirit, because it really shows you how the vigilante, our spirit, basically he's working by himself. He's got the whole basically world on his shoulders, walking, quietly in the street with so much, heaviness on him and drama, and that we get through the black background and the yellow light shining right on the figure. Let me pull this over here. This is Dropsy Avenue. I put this in. It's 4 pages. And by the way, all the images in the exhibition are originals. And so this is pencil and pen and ink. And what we're looking at right now, unfortunately, I can't get us closer, but these 2 images are from a series that he created called Dropsy Avenue. And Dropsy Avenue comes a page right out of his childhood. It's basically a neighborhood and a street, Dropsy Avenue in New York, where people from all different ethnicities lived on the same street, whether it was African-American communities with the Irish, with the Italians, with the Jews, and all different ages. And that is what the series Dropsy Avenue looks at, is the interaction between the different ages and different ethnicities that make up just on this one street, Dropsy Avenue. During World War II, Eisner joined the US Army. And during that time, Spirit was put on hold, and the Army put his illustration abilities to good use. So what he was doing was, number one, he created a lovable character called Joe Dope, who was in the military. And, it was really a way to make the soldiers laugh and enjoy themselves as they were reading things. Here was a manual. Eisner was also tasked to create, and these were coming out in Army newsletters, Joe Dope, the character, basically like comics in an Army newsletters for the soldiers. He also he was tasked to create manuals for the soldiers for operating different machineries. But the task was for Eisner, how can I create a manual that these soldiers can relate to? And the way he did it was, as you see right here, creating it with illustrations and funny illustrations. And here is the actual information, but it's in a fashion that's, enjoyable to read. And he continued for 20 years doing this for the Army, as he left the Army at the close of the war. But again, he continued working and creating these manuals for the Army for 20 years. This is part of a series called The Name of the Game. And he created this comic based on his wife Anne's life and her multi-generational family. And what is very interesting to note about Eisner is everything he created always had some sort of something very important for him, that he put a piece of himself in each of his characters and series, which is very important to understand about Eisner. So in The Name of the Game, this is done after his wife Anne's family, multi-generational family from the States, very wealthy. Her father was a stockbroker, so you can see him here with his, fancy suit, very successful stockbroker. And he wanted his daughter to marry somebody successful. And in the story, the daughter is dating a poet, which is, it's basically a what if story. So the poet takes place of Eisner as being the artist. And what happens is the father convinces Eisner, or I should say the poet, to join his firm, and he becomes very successful. And then he ends up being a real jerk to his wife. And it's a what if story. And the reality of the situation is that Eisner became a very successful illustrator and comic book illustrator and writer, which is, that's part of the charm of this whole series, what he called the what if. This is a small slice of sunset in Sunshine City. And basically it's a nod to Eisner when he semi-retired from New York to Florida in the 1980s. And this is all, vignettes of his life in the condos and other retirees. And he did a little series about that. Sunset in Sunshine City. I put several comics and books on display in this exhibition. Unfortunately, I can't get you close to show them to you, but one of the pieces I did put was the first graphic novel that he did called A Contract with God, right here. And that was also semi-autobiographical about his upbringing. Again, there we go back to putting himself in everything he did. And here we have, again, if you get a chance to come back, you can click on my data points to bring yourself closer. Here we have The Name of the Game. And again, this is semi-autobiographical. It is about a family growing up in New York City, also low income, and all the trials and tribulations that happens with the family in the surrounding neighborhood. And as you can see here, just different types of family drama. And this is an illustration of Eisner reading with kids in the library. This is Mortal Kombat, which is funny. It's not a video game, Mortal Kombat, but again, it's another series that I put in the exhibit. If I can get us a little bit closer. This particular one is sad. It's the story of, and again, his stories were about real people and real things they had to deal with. This is a story about a woman who had been taking care of her father for over 20 years, most of her life. And she's over 40 when he passes away. And she's angry. And what is she going to do? She's alone. She's single. She has no life at this point. She's only been taking care of her father. She doesn't know how to do anything. And that her story, comes along here. And it's a powerful one. Let me bring you back. I do want to show you one other piece, if I can get us here. This was his series, Fagin the Jew, which takes place just like Oliver Twist in a low-income area. But in this case, Fagin happens to be, he created Fagin it's the story of Oliver Twist, but from Fagin's point of view. And Fagin was an Ashkenazi Jew. And in this episode, it's everything from Fagin's point of view, how Fagin is a poor guy trying to make him something of his life. He was also a fighter. And, it was an interesting riff on the Oliver Twist story. Eisner was so beloved with his visionary concepts of the spirit and tales of, human life and becoming the father of the graphic novel, which was hugely impacted comics. He also was adamant in the comic book art and illustrative art. And he became so well known and so well respected that the annual Eisner Awards were named after him, which are basically the Oscars for comic books. And that pretty much concludes the tour today. It's my pleasure to be here. And again, I would recommend you coming back to our website and clicking on these white circles, going at your leisure, being able to read the comics when you can, get closer to them, and hit on my data points. And with that, I'm going to close this evening, and thank you very much for joining us.